I'm here in connection with my recently published book, The Venturesome Economy. The book was funded by a generous research grant from the Kauffman Foundation. And not only was it funded by the Kauffman Foundation, I got a lot of encouragement, support, and advice along the way. Prosperity depends on innovation, but that innovation has to be widespread. It's not innovation that is generated by a few entrepreneurs or a few brilliant inventors and engineers. For innovation to make a difference to society, it has to permeate society. And we're all players in this massively multiplayer innovation game. And this is not a spectator sport. And therefore, as a matter of policy, we shouldn't focus on just one thing like improving science or getting more engineers or getting more scientists, but to think of what we need to do to make society as a whole, all of us, more innovative and more productive. That's one message of the book. The second message of the book is closely related to it, is that we are not in a zero-sum game with other countries, that we all prosper together or not, and that if China and India do better than they have done in the past, our share of innovations, of world GDP, of everything will go down. But that is not a bad thing. It is Massachusetts doesn't become more prosperous if New Mexico fails. And that looking at the world in terms of a sort of Olympics, that if we win more gold medals, other people will win less, and if other people win more gold medals, we're worse off, is the wrong way to look at things. So I think even the rhetoric of American competitiveness is a dangerous and false rhetoric. My message is forget about our supposed competitive position in the world. Think about how well what we can do to make our society as a whole innovative and prosperous. A classic example would be the personal computer. And the personal computer is an artifact which has transformed modern life. And how did this come about? There were some contributions by people in labs who invented the principles behind the microprocessor, which then is used as the brains behind a personal computer. But it wasn't just the people in labs. There were entrepreneurs in the early stages. And then IBM got into the game. And what IBM did was, yes, they made modest improvements on the engineering side, but they also marketed the product. And then all of us, we the consumers of computers, have played an enormous role, because all of us have taken risks in buying computers. All of us have been innovative in using them for our personal needs. We've been resourceful in solving the problems that have arisen. So so this is sort of a classic example of how everybody plays and everybody benefits. It's also an example of the fact that we are not in a competition with the rest of the world. So the fact that we use personal computers a lot and we use them well hasn't harmed anybody else. Many of the important technologies that make personal computers useful in our day-to-day lives were invented abroad. So what? Many of the actual components of the computer are cheaply made in China and Taiwan. That is also to our benefit. You could also extend this to healthcare. One of the most important lifesavers in medicine is the idea of washing your hands in hospitals. It seems completely trivial, but before surgeons used not to wash their hands before they operated, and so mortality rates in hospitals were incredibly high. And then someone discovered that you needed to wash your hands, and so that discovery was important. Also important was the use of the discovery in all hospitals. Just finding out that washing your hands is important is not enough. So we had to sort of train everyone to start washing hands, and this had an enormous benefit for public health. But guess what? The idea didn't start in the US. It started in Europe, and it was to the benefit of people in Europe. It was to the benefit of people in the US. It did not involve a major scientific breakthrough, but yet has made an enormous contribution to the well-being of our lives. We could be doing wrong by getting obsessed with one part of the innovation process to the detriment of the other. So we could, for instance, say marketing is a bad thing, let's discourage it, that it's a parasitical function. And this is a view that is taken in the pharmaceutical industry. And if, for instance, we simply rewarded pharmaceutical companies and gave them huge tax breaks for just developing drugs and not for selling them and having them effectively used, we harm public health. Likewise, policies that reward people for bricks and mortar investment, for buying computers, but not for using them, do harm, because we are implicitly discriminating against the use of computers in favor of buying more of them. Or if we have an educational system that focuses exclusively or heavily on training more PhDs and scientists rather than improving the general quality of education and making K through 12 education, for instance, or education in community colleges of a sort that gets people to be problem solvers, to be resourceful, to be self-confident. The fact is, we have somehow, not necessarily through design, created a very venturesome and resourceful society. And we should do all we can to not mess it up. And so simply the avoidance of harm is important. To give you a very current example, the stimulus package is in some sense directing consumption and spending to particular things that some government bureaucrat or some congressman thinks is necessary to stimulate the economy. But we don't know what innovations need to be consumed to lay the groundwork for tomorrow's personal computer. So the personal computer took off in the dark days of very deep recession in the early 1980s. And in spite of the recession, there were people who were willing to spend fairly large sums of money as a proportion of their salaries to buy personal computers. But if you said, okay, instead of them buying personal computers, we'll take away their money and use it for infrastructure, well, that might not necessarily have been a good choice. So leaving things that ought to be left alone is important, but at the same time focusing on things that are necessary for society as a whole to be resourceful, particularly education, is also important. So we've become too technical in our economic analyses, too reductionist. We try to reduce a complex world into a few narrow variables and thereby lose sight of the big picture and lose sight of the big trends. And we need to step back and look at some of the basic foundations of what makes the economy tick. Likewise, in education, we can get too narrowly focused on where did we teach them calculus by such and such age, and were they able to do advanced placement tests, and instead of thinking about, well, what do we need to do to train the hearts and minds of the next generation of students to be venturesome and to be effectively venturesome in this broad sense. I don't really care whether American students do better or worse than the Koreans or Taiwanese in their math Olympiads. That's irrelevant. The issue is, do our kids have the self-confidence to solve problems? Do they have the capacity to go look for mathematical knowledge as and when it's necessary? Are they willing to experiment? Are they willing to work well with others? Can they communicate? So focusing on these big picture ideas, I think is more important than the specific technical knowledge that is communicated. And therefore, I'm a little bit nervous about this push towards education based on test scores, rather than education based on creating productive and resourceful and venturesome citizens.